So some of the OGs to the channel might be looking at this video now and thinking, haven't I already seen this? Because the first video I ever uploaded to this channel over a year ago was on this exact topic. And let's just say that that video was made before I actually properly knew what I was doing. So in celebration of that video reaching 2,000 views, I'm going to be recovering the topic and looking at the Fog King all over again. Now the original video is still on the channel and will be linked in the description on this video, so you can go back and rewatch that older video if you want to. But for now, sit back, relax as we discuss the Fog King. Now the original primarily covered the topic of what the Fog King was and what it could be, and I gave loads of crazy predictions, like the Fog King was somehow related to the Phantasms in Xenoblade Chronicles 2, which he more than likely probably isn't. But one thing is for sure, and that's that the Fog King has a striking resemblance to a certain enemy type in Xenoblade Chronicles 2, and those are the Guldos, specifically the enemy known as Infernal Guldo. The Fog King's model is basically ripped straight from this enemy, as the two look identical, you know, excluding the fact that one's made of fog and the other one's a big scary monster. And going on a slight tangent, it was mentioned in my Xenoblade Chronicles 3 prediction video that this particular Guldo that you fight through Xenoblade Chronicles 2 is Lady Mayneth, and I can understand why many of you think that and feel that way, as in the cutscene after defeating the boss, Rex picks up a card which appears to be Galea's, and later on in Xenoblade Chronicles 2 where we actually see Galea, we can see that she's wearing a very similar card to the one that Rex picks up, which could lead you to think that this Guldo enemy was Galea herself, and because the models are virtually identical, that the Fog King has some relation to Galea as well. But let me give you the problem with that theory. That'd be dumb. The only way that this would work would be that when the experiment occurred and half of Zanza was taken, instead of taking half of Galea the same way it did to Klaus, it separated her soul from her body. Her soul went to Xenoblade Chronicles 1 and became Lady Mayneth, and her lifeless corpse would have been left in the experiment room, meaning that Klaus must have seen his dead friend's body, chucked it out of the orbital station, back down to ground level, for it then to be combined and corrupted with the core crystals. And call me crazy, but I don't think that's what happened. And I think this is just a situation of mistaken identity where Monolith Soft has reused assets already in the game. But this does at least answer one question, which is that Lady Mayneth and this part of Galea is not the Fog King. Although Guldos being related could be a separate case entirely. Guldos were created through the combination of a human being fused and combined with a core crystal, which is effectively just data from that planet, which means it's theoretically possible to see these similar enemies appear again in the future if these requirements are met. And a similar thing has already occurred in a different game, specifically at the end of Xenoblade Chronicles X, where the Lifehold activates its security systems and starts creating monsters based on DNA from Earth. So it's possible that something similar to this happened elsewhere, and that's how the Fog King obtained this form, by possessing something which meets the same requirements. It's also possible that the fog itself is the data, and therefore possessing a human is what turns the Fog King into that shape. But for now, we don't know if the Fog King was just reusing an old model, or if there's actually some relation to the Guldos. One thing that is likely, however, is that the Fog King is related in some way to the Tainted from Xenoblade Chronicles X. The Tainted consist of all different life forms from all over Mira, such as Karos from Koldros and Sphinxes from Oblivion Primordia, but they seem almost possessed, similar to how the Fog King makes fog beasts. And for one thing, their eyes actually look kind of similar, with the effects that comes off of monsters as they're being transformed into fog beasts, and the tainted eyes in general. Now, LXGK recently made a video which briefly talked about this subject as well, on how the Tainted can be related to the fog beasts and Fog King, and primarily how Xenoblade Chronicles X links to the main series. It's absolutely worth a watch, a link will be in the description. Mentioned in that video is how the Endbringer Telethia treats the Tainted, and how it's quite similar to the Telethia in Future Connected, with the Telethia specifically targeting the Tainted and taking them down, whilst allowing you and your party members who are currently there, who haven't been possessed, to go on freely, which clearly shows some hostile behaviour towards the Tainted, which could mean mean that the two of them in some way are linked. Whether the Tainted themselves are actually fog beasts can be determined at a later date, but there is definitely some sort of connection there. But the bigger connection to me in Xenoblade Chronicles X is actually featured in the song Black Tar. I highly recommend listening to the song and reading the lyrics, as there are a fair few references to what sounds like the fog beasts. Specifically, the lyrics stating seeing friends snatched and darkly possessed, the tar inside stealing the body and breath till only a shell is left, which sounds pretty similar to how the Fog King creates fog beasts out of animals. Now, fortunately for the characters in the game, unfortunately for us, we never see the Fog King try to possess Ahom or Hyentia in Future Connected, so we don't actually know what effect it would have. But again, this song could give us quite a good idea of what that'd be like. And then there's also a little short segment where an NPC/character seems to be saying some words whilst being possessed via the fog. And call me crazy, but I think we might see these exact words said in the next Xenoblade game when one of the characters gets possessed via the fog, which would honestly be one of the greatest connections interconnecting the Xenoblade games. For a freaking OST, man! But it's very clear to me that in 2015, when Monolith Soft released this game, they already had ideas similar to the Fog King in mind. I'm gonna have another link in the description though to this OST with all the lyrics. Give it a listen and see what you think for yourself. But moving away from Xenoblade Chronicles X, there's something else I want to discuss with you all as well, and that's the relation of the Fog King to the Rift. Throughout all of Future Connected, the two are described as separate entities from each other, by Shulk and the party members referring to them separately as the Fog King and the Rift. However, I don't think that was always entirely necessary, and what I'm about to explain is speculation, but with the evidence being the cutscenes of Future Connected, I think you'll actually all agree with me that the Rift and the Fog King are one and the same. The Fog King is just the Rift creating a physical body for itself in the image of a Guldo. The Fog King is supposedly the one that creates the fog beasts. However, in that exact cutscene, the camera doesn't pan to the Fog King, it pans to the Rift, which has just opened up in the sky. And with your first encounter with the Fog King, it comes from nowhere else but the Rift. And after being attacked with concentrated ether thanks to Melia, and the fog disperses, he returns from none other than the Rift. The lasers that the Fog King shoots as well are also the exact same that come out of the Rift. So I'm pretty convinced that they're one and the same, which therefore leads us to speculate on whatever the Rift is or what's on the other side of the Rift. It also, to me anyway, explains a little bit more how he's defeated, as you overload both sides of the Fog King and the Rift at once with ether, as Melia unleashes that massive ether burst, whilst the Telethia bombard the Rift. What was mentioned in the old video was that I thought that the Telethia were passing through the Rift, which is still a possibility, and would probably be the biggest connection to the Endbringer Telethia and how he arrived in Mira, as it's safe to say that Telethia shouldn't be there. Anyways, many of you mentioned in the comments on that video that you thought the Telethia were attaching themselves to the Rift and destroying it, which is definitely plausible, but I don't think that's what's happening. The Telethia are monsters, although some of them still seem to remember parts of their former life. They are by nature monsters that feed on ether, and no living creature would willingly go to their food source to destroy themselves, which leads us nicely onto my personal predictions for the Fog King and how I think everything will connect in the future. And of course, some of this will be linked to the Xenoblade Chronicles 3 predictions that I put out recently. So if you haven't seen that, make sure to watch that after finishing this video. But with all the information that we have on the Fog King, my prediction is this. I think the Fog King is an ability or power that we'll see in the next Xenoblade game. And this power was sent through a rift, similar to the one that Rex and Azurda can be seen passing through at the end of Xenoblade Chronicles 2, and was forcefully put onto the Bionist's shoulder. The Fog King himself seems to have no will, as his only intention can be that of corrupting others and turning turning them into fog beasts, effectively spreading the fog. It's my guess that in the next Xenoblade game, we will see probably the main villain of the game forcibly put this power through the rift in an attempt to corrupt that world with the same power, turning everything into the black fog, which could be the main villain's food source or something along the lines of that. For now, we know too little about the Fog King, but the one thing that I can be absolutely certain of with all of you is we're going to learn a lot about him very soon. I hope you've all enjoyed this video, and if you have, consider hitting that red subscription button and hitting the notification bell so you can stay up to date with all of my latest content. And if there's any other older videos on the channel that you'd want me to remake and put in high definition, then leave those suggestions down in the comments. And until next time guys, peace.